You were taught, probably before you could spell its name, that the praying mantis is a curiosity, a garden ornament, a slightly creepy insect that eats its mate, preys with its arms, and belongs, at best, in a jar with holes punched in the lid so children can watch it for an afternoon before it is released or forgotten. You were taught that removing it is harmless, that relocating it is kind, that an egg case on a branch in winter is debris to be tidied away, that the mantis is a novelty in your garden, not a resident, not a worker, not something whose presence quietly determines whether your vegetables survive the summer. Every one of those beliefs is wrong, and the cost of believing them over the last century and a half has been enormous. The misconception did not begin in your childhood. It began in the drawing rooms of 19th century Europe when Victorian naturalists, writing for a public hungry for shocking stories about the natural world, seized upon a single observation and turned it into a legend. In 1886, the French entomologist Jean-Henri Fabre published his popular observations of mantis behavior. He described, in vivid and dramatic, a female mantis devouring her mate mid-copulation in the glass jars of his laboratory. The description was accurate. The context was not. Fabre was watching insects trapped in enclosed containers, deprived of escape, sometimes deprived of food. He did not tell his readers this. He simply described the horror, and the horror traveled. Within a generation, the praying mantis had entered the Western popular imagination as something monstrous, a femme fatale of the insect world, a creature so violent that its own reproduction was a form of murder. Illustrated encyclopedias repeated the claim. Schoolbooks repeated it. Later, 20th century science documentaries repeated it, replaying the same footage of captive cannibalism, framed as if it were the norm. The name did not help. Praying mantis, coined in the 17th century for the posture of its folded forelegs, was a mistranslation of intent. The insect is not praying. The insect is praying. But the theological word stuck, and with it came the sense that this creature was somehow spiritually strange, either sacred or sinister, but never simply useful. We inherited both stories, the demon and the saint, and in inheriting them, we lost the animal itself. Consider what that cost looks like in a single suburban yard. A homeowner sees a praying mantis on a tomato plant. She has been told from childhood that the mantis is a fascinating oddity but nothing more. She relocates it to a distant flower bed, or, if she is squeamish, to the neighbor's hedge. She feels she has done a kind thing. She has, in fact, dismantled a hunting territory. That mantis, in the 14 days it would have spent on that tomato plant, would have consumed between 40 and 60 pest insects. Aphids, cabbage worms, small beetles, moth caterpillars, whiteflies. The chemical alternative, a broad-spectrum insecticide, kills roughly the same number of pests, but it also kills pollinators, ground beetles, lacewings, ladybugs, and any mantis nymphs that hatch nearby the following spring. It also enters the soil, the runoff, and eventually the water table. Multiply that decision across every gardener in a suburb, then across every suburb in a country. The cumulative cost of the mantis myth is measured not in individual insects, but in the systematic replacement of a free, precise, self-regulating biological control system with a slower, dirtier, chemical one. There is another cost, less measurable, but perhaps more serious. When we misread a creature this thoroughly, we lose the ability to see anything else in the garden accurately. The lie about the mantis is a template. It teaches us to look for spectacle instead of function, to value the beautiful pollinator and dismiss the strange hunter, and the garden, sensing our confusion, slowly stopped speaking to us. The turning point came quietly, in laboratories that did not set out to redeem the praying mantis at all. In 2016, researchers at Newcastle University published findings in the journal Current Biology, describing a form of three-dimensional vision in mantises unlike any previously known in the animal kingdom. They called it asymmetric stereopsis, a system that processes depth not by comparing static images from two eyes, as humans do, but by detecting the motion of features between them. The mantis, it turned out, was seeing the world in a way biology had not imagined possible. That study cracked something open. Once the mantis was understood as a visual specialist rather than a biological curiosity, other research began to accumulate. Cambridge and Duke researchers documented strike times of 30 to 50 milliseconds, among the fastest predatory movements ever recorded in an invertebrate. Behavioral ecologists in Germany and the United States began documenting consistent individual personalities across generations of mantises. And field entomologists, quietly for decades, had been demonstrating something the popular literature had missed entirely. In natural, unenclosed settings, sexual cannibalism occurs in roughly 25 to 30% of matings, not the near-universal ratio suggested by Fabre's jars. The mantis was not a monster. The mantis was a highly evolved, ecologically essential, individually complex predator, and the popular story about it had been almost completely inverted. The rehabilitation had begun, but it has barely reached the general public, which is the reason we are talking today. Let us take back the mantis, one restored fact at a time. What we now know is that the praying mantis is a keystone garden predator. Adult mantises consume a wide range of soft-bodied pests, and studies of North American and European mantis species have shown that a single individual will patrol a territory of only a few square meters, often a single shrub, a single row of vegetables, a single stretch of border. It does not roam. It does not wander. It commits to a small piece of ground and hunts it methodically for the entire duration of its adult life. What you have in your garden is not a visitor. It is a resident, and it has chosen you. What we should have asked was, how does it see? And the answer for a long time was hiding in plain sight. The mantis has 5 eyes, 2 large compound eyes for motion detection across a field of nearly 300 degrees, 3 smaller simple eyes, called ocelli, arranged in a triangle on the forehead, sensing light intensity and orientation. Within each compound eye is a specialized foveal region, a zone of high-resolution vision previously thought to be limited to vertebrates. When a mantis turns its head to look at you, and it is the only insect in the world that can rotate its head 180 degrees, it is not uncanny. It is bringing you into that fovea. It is, in the most literal sense, focusing. What we now know is that the strike is not reflex. It is a calculation. High-speed footage shows that the mantis does not aim at where the prey is. It aims at where the prey will be, 3 to 5 milliseconds into the future, adjusting its trajectory in flight if the target changes course. That is real-time predictive modeling performed by a brain smaller than a grain of rice. Robotics engineers at several institutions are now studying mantis strike geometry as a template for low-power targeting systems, because the natural design outperforms our engineered ones by orders of magnitude. What we should have asked was, what is the egg case? The structure that gardeners routinely scrape off branches in winter, called an ootheca. It is one of the most sophisticated protective architectures produced by any insect. The female secretes a foam that hardens on contact with air into a rigid, insulating shell, thermally shielded, water repellent, chemically resistant to most predators. Inside are between 100 and 400 eggs, arranged in orderly rows, held in temperature-buffered chambers. They will hatch in spring, on a schedule keyed to soil temperature, pouring out dozens of miniature, fully formed hunters ready to begin patrolling the same garden their mother chose. If you have ever pruned an ootheca into a yard waste bag, you have thrown away next year's biological pest control. Not metaphorically, literally. What we now know is that mantises have personalities. Behavioral studies, most notably those published in the journal Animal Behavior, over the past decade, have shown that individual mantises display consistent differences in boldness, aggression, and risk tolerance across time and across contexts. Some are quick strikers, some are conservative, some are patient waiters. These traits are stable. The same mantis measured in June will show the same tendencies in August. This is not the behavior of an automaton. It is the behavior of an individual. What we should have asked was, what have older cultures already noticed? The Chinese martial art of Tanglang Quan, praying mantis kung fu, was reportedly developed in the 17th century by a monk who spent months watching a single mantis hunt and built an entire combat system from its geometry. The Sand people of southern Africa have revered the mantis for thousands of years as Kagen, a creator-trickster figure at the heart of their cosmology. Ancient Egyptian funerary texts include a mantis-like guide, B-Sen-W, who leads the dead through the underworld. These are not superstitions. These are the reports of cultures that watched the natural world for far longer than modern science has existed. And what they saw in the mantis was not a jar-bound freak. It was intelligence. And what we now know, finally, is that the mantis is old. The oldest known fossil mantis, Santan mantis axelrodi, dates to the early Cretaceous, roughly 125 million years ago. This animal was ambushing prey on the branches of primitive flowering plants while dinosaurs walked beneath them. The individual now sitting on your basal is a descendant of a lineage that survived the mass extinction that killed the tyrannosaurs. It has been perfecting the art of stillness longer than birds have had feathers. Removing it from your garden is not a small act. It is an interruption of 125 million years of continuous refinement. I have to admit, I believed the lie too. For most of my life, I grew up in a house where mantises were treated as objects, something to catch, something to keep in jar for an afternoon and then release somewhere, anywhere, as if location did not matter. As a child, I once broke off a mantis egg case from a fence post because it looked untidy. I thought I was helping. I did not know then that I was ending 100 lives before they had begun, that the mother who had made it had chosen that exact fence post for a reason. The wind, the sun angle, the proximity of aphid-heavy roses 10 feet away. I did not know that she had planned. I did not know she was capable of planning. I have never been able to unknow it since. There is a specific kind of quiet that arrives when you realize you have been mistreating something ancient and precise for years, without malice, simply because no one told you. That quiet is what this whole channel is made of. If a praying mantis has chosen your garden, do nothing. Do not move it. Do not photograph it too close. Do not offer it a jar. If you find an ootheca in winter on a stem or a fence rail or the corner of a shed, leave it exactly where the mother placed it. She chose that spot with more care than most of us choose the seats we sit in. What did your family teach you about this creature? Drop it below. We're unlearning together. I want to know the name your grandmother used for it, the story you were told about it as a child, whether it was a good omen or a bad one in your household. I read every reply. The best regional folklore gets pinned, and the next misconception we'll dismantle is even older, passed down for at least 9 generations. It's about something you touched today and didn't think twice about. Something so ordinary you would swear it could not possibly have a secret. It does. And once you hear it, the object itself will never feel the same in your hand again.